I'm very proud to introduce you to our guest this morning, John Seel, the author of the newly released book, The New Copernicans, Understanding the Millennial Contribution to the Church. John is a cultural renewal entrepreneur and social impact consultant. He works with people and projects that promote human flourishing and the common good. His expertise is in the dynamics of cultural change. He was the former director of cultural engagement at the John Templeton Foundation and is the founder of John Seel Consulting, LLC. He has a PhD in American Studies from the University of Maryland, a master's in divinity from Covenant Theological, and a bachelor's from Austin College. He's the director of Evangelicals for Social Action's New Copernican Salons at Eastern University and blogs regularly at www.ncconversations.com. John Seel, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you, and shalom.
Shalom to you. John, this whole concept behind your book, first of all, I got a hold of it and I thought, Copernicus takes me back all the way and saying, okay, Copernicus, this radical thinker that says that the Aristotle view is that the earth is the center of all things and everything revolves around it. Copernicus comes along and says, no, the sun, and we not only do we rotate, but we revolve. And this is, he's a heretic, he's cast out of the scientific communities, he's rejected with this concept, and of course he's proven right. And now you engage in this new Copernican concept. Where did this get birthed in you? Where in your history did this idea of social impact, cultural renewal, full engagement, where was that birthed in you?
Well, I'm the son of missionaries, so I'm a third culture kid. So I grew up overseas for 17 years. My parents were on the mission field for 38. And so my interest in the dynamics of culture and the differences in culture stem from the fact that I had the privilege of growing up as a son of godly medical missionaries in South Korea. So that's really where it came to foster deep in my heart that I realized that people see the world through particular frames or pictures. And what the young people, I'm arguing, see is they reframe their understanding of religion, relationships, and reality in ways that are fundamentally different than what is being communicated by the evangelical church in particular. And my argument is that it is a prophetic voice, namely they're calling us back to a more ancient way of framing reality, and they are actually onto something, and that if we would follow their understanding rather than wring our hands, we would find ourselves becoming more like Jesus. Now, I do recognize that it's a little ironic to say that the fate of the church is going to be dependent on us listening to the unchurched. And I do recognize that. And that's why it represents a paradigm shift. And that's why Copernicus comes into the mix, because he represented something that fundamental, a completely new way of thinking about life and reality.
John, what is it that the perception, the myth that surrounds millennials? My daughter is born in 1989, right there in the midst of that 1980 to 2000. She runs a chemical company. The minute she graduated high school, she moved out and wanted to be on her own. I was a single dad for a long time, and so it was time for her to fly. I flew at a young age. She knew that I flew at a young age. She wanted to fly at a young age, and she found her way to run an ecologically friendly. It's the only green chemical company that does what they do with a line of patented products that are completely green. Everything they do is absolutely green, and they're revolutionizing the pulp and paper industry, they're revolutionizing the trucking industry because they care about the environment. Sure. Now, she doesn't, she's not engaged congregationally because their message is the same message it's always been, and it doesn't resonate with her. It's probably right. The same reason that I didn't come to faith until I was 44, because the message didn't resonate with me.
Right.
So,
well, there's a huge number of young people that are increasingly alienated from the institutional church. It's somewhere between 40 and 50% of this age group. And if we can't find a way to communicate to them in a meaningful way, we will not only lose a generation, but many of the institutions that have been fostered within what I will call institutional evangelicalism will fail in the course. And I'll put it this way, in a business sense, you're an ex-business guy. No big company thinks that it can actually survive without taking seriously the millennial audience that represents the largest cohort demographic in the marketplace today. And their values are going to become increasingly more and more important. And we are extremely naive as a church if we think that we can blow right past them and not take them seriously. Now, that said, in my book, I argue that almost everything said about millennials is wrong, and that there's a good reason why millennials don't like to be called millennials, because they don't see themselves in the story we're telling about them. Now, for example, if I were to tell a story about you and your family and your relationships, and I was very public about that story, and you couldn't see yourself in the story I'm telling about you, and even worse, it made you totally pissed off, then maybe, just maybe, there's something really wrong with the story you're telling. And that's my argument. They're the most studied and most misunderstood generational cohort, and yet at the same time enormously important. And if we don't reframe the story, we will miss the insights that they provide for the church, which will help us become not only more like Jesus, but will enable us to actually capitalize on the greatest missional opportunity the church has faced in many years. This is the front line of mission work today.
I could not agree with you more. Here's some statistics that you share. Of Americans with a church background, 76% described as religious nuns or unaffiliated, and it's the fastest growing segment of the population. Mm-hmm. Close to 40% of millennials fit this religious profile. Mm-hmm. So they were raised in church, but now that they are in this age group, they're searching for something different than the same message that they heard in Vacation Bible or well, what message are they not resonating with?
Well, I'm arguing that they're not denying faith per se, but they're denying the way faith has been framed, most often as an either-or, black and white kind of category, with people who hold to their convictions with a kind of dying certainty that they recognize is actually not the way people live. Actually, for them, all beliefs are naturally fused with doubt. And so for them, doubt and belief go hand in hand, but there's actually no place within the church where we can actually talk that way, because everything is framed as in black and white kind of categories. And they affirm a both-and view of reality, not an either-or view of reality.
As I look at the perception of millennials, they are portrayed as being electronically dependent, technologically dependent. They say they're relational, but relational to them is at multiple levels. They can all sit around a table together at Starbucks and still be texting and interchanging with people outside that sphere, but have I think you used the term spherical as opposed to linear, right? And in keeping with the DNA, which is one of my passions about this coming weaponized, 40 countries are engaged in it right now. I look at it as helical. There are places where they intersect, they bisect, and then they diverge, and then they come back, but they always remain connected. There are always strands of connection, even though their lives go in and out of engagements.
You can think of it as a cloud in
Exactly.
the internet sense. It's a cloud.
Exactly.
Multiple connections all over the place happening simultaneously, but in no way is it easy to put them in a narrow little box. And they're very happy not to operate in narrow little boxes because they're happy just to operate within the cloud neighborhood.
What are some of the other misconceptions we have about millennials?
They're viewed as entitled, and they're viewed as a little too precious by half, the snowflake argument that is sometimes made by conservatives. The fact is that I think it'd be fair to say there is some truth to all the stereotypes. Otherwise, they wouldn't be stereotypes. So let's just say that, put that out there. The problem is that when people like us see people engaging on cell phones all the time, we don't understand how that animates their relational context. Whereas for us, it seems totally disembodied and abstracted and totally non-relational. But to them, it's simply an affirmation of what is the most important thing for them and the way they navigate it largely seamlessly. So I think we have to be careful of the stereotypes, because what the stereotypes tend to do is mask the contributions that they bring to the table. For example, they're oriented more to experience. They operate from lived reality. Maybe we could call it an incarnational experience rather than abstracted propositions. To put it this way, to use academic talk, they are the opposite of Gnostics. If Gnostics is all in your head and all in theory and all in abstractions and all in words and propositions and even books, they would rather come from a lived experience with dirt under the fingernail and Jesus in a manger. I mean, so they want the lived reality. So to use a big word, they're phenomenologically oriented. That is, they come from the phenomena of lived experience. And so I think they're more incarnational. I think they're more Trinitarian. That is, they naturally accept paradox, ambiguity, complexity. They do not think that it's easy, that reality is able to be easily put into a little box. They understand its complexity. I think they're more aspirational, and that is, they always want to and the meaning of things, and they really do want to make the world a better place. And I think that they're more revolutionary. Now, if you were to put those things together, they're more incarnational, they're more Trinitarian, they're more aspirational, and they're more revolutionary. All you put that together, it begins to sound a lot like Jesus. And so even if they don't follow Jesus, the frame by which they are processing life in reality is actually calling the church back to an ancient, more Jewish way of appropriating reality, which we have lost sight of since, in my book, I argue mostly against the Enlightenment that has been fused with the Reformation and has made us think about truth as head, heart, hand. That is, we start with the head, or if we do Bible study, it's observation, interpretation, application. The fact of the matter is that neither the way the world works, it's not the way neuroscience teaches us, it's not the way we learn. And what they're saying is actually true, that it's always hand, heart, head. We start with experience, we reframe it in our imaginations, and then we analyze it in our minds. And that's the way we have, but we have gotten it backwards. And as a consequence, we have distorted the gospel and our framing is wrong. So I'm arguing that they're not really rejecting faith so much as rejecting the way faith has been framed.
So the message of the gospel, how do we, well, there are really just so many questions firing in my head right now. My heart is for this generation because they have been accused of running back home and not able to survive in a corporate environment.
Yes, because, they've been put upon for sure.
Right. They're carrying a tremendous amount of student debt.
Yes.
And that's a huge burden that many of us had to work our way through college, and tuition wasn't then what it is today. Back in when I was in college in the 60s and 70s, it was $2,500 a year. That was a lot of money at that time.
$3,000 for mine.
Right. So now it's 40.
Now it's 60.
Right, 40, 50, 60,000 a year. You're talking about coming out of college if you have, just as an undergrad, with this tremendous burden of debt. And if you have any aspirations of going on for a master's, or today now you skip the master's and go right to the PhD, which is the new model of fast tracking. They carry a huge financial burden.
Right.
Now, part of that is attributed not to them, but to mom and dad.
Most of the challenges they face are attributed to boomer generation and what we've done, the world we have bequeathed them, which is not in any way a better world than the grandparents. In other words, we put them behind an 8-ball. There are increasingly articles about millennials being resentful of boomers and tired of being, made fun of by our generation. At one level, I'm very almost apologetic to be an expert on millennials at my age because I'm a grandfather and I'm not one. And even though I have studied them carefully and I have 3 children from which I have learned much, I do recognize that it's not native to me. And so my contribution is to help people who are my age learn that there's something that we need to pay attention to and to loosen the grip on the reins so that we, in fact, can help empower our children to actually take over the leadership that is going to be needed within the key institutions of the church and society.
You certainly know your stuff when it comes to millennials. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, I want to dig into the concepts that are in the book of how do we reach the millennials, how do we take them seriously, and how do we bring the message of the gospel to them by giving an attentive ear to what they have to say and understanding the vernacular which in the context in which it's being said, because I don't think we understand that. The church at large, Christendom, does not understand that. My question before break for you is a yes or no one. Is this a North America problem or is this a global problem?
Let's call it Western.
Western, okay, Western civilization.
We'll include Europe. Having grown up in Asia and well aware of cultural differences and the variability of different cultures, I'm not ready to say that it's the same in China or Korea, for example, or Singapore. There are commonalities, but the reason I make that point is that what I'm talking about is a mental frame, not an age group. And most of the times when people are making these sweeping comparisons, they're talking merely about an age cohort. And I'm actually talking about the fact that they are carriers of a new way of thinking.
Understood. We're talking with John Seel, author of The New Copernicans, Millennials, and the Survival of the Church. To our audience watching right now from all over the world, are you engaging? Are you relational? Are you giving an ear to the opinions of this up-and-coming generation that are the same age as Jesus was, the same age as many of the disciples were, of many of the followers of a new and better covenant? And the voice was accepted by many, rejected by many. But those who gave ear to the context in which Jesus was preaching was solid, and it was purely relational. Relational with Him, relational with the Father, relational with the Holy Spirit. Causes us to examine each one of ourselves as, are we truly relational like Jesus? And is this the generation that's going to bring that message and swing the church back to the relational Acts chapter 2 church, where people actually fellowshipped together in a meaningful way and dealt with people's needs, not with their wants? We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with John Seel, author of The New Copernicans, Millennials, and the Survival of the Church. Back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our one-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with John Seel, author of The New Copernicans, Millennials and the Survival of the Church. John, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
John, define for our audience, if you will, please, what is the New Copernican? Because all millennials don't fall into this category, do they?
No, a New Copernicans is generally found between the ages of, people born between 1980 and 2000 is roughly what we talk of as millennials. And what I'm arguing is that they are not the cause of this shift, but many of them are carriers of the shift. In other words, they have intuitively bought into the cultural shift, and this shift is dominant, wide, and influential. And since there's going to be about $30 trillion worth of wealth transfer from boomers to millennials, it means in the next 20 years, these values that they hold are going to become more and more a part of the mainstream of America. So what America will look like in 2050 will be more like Portland today than Birmingham. In other words, and my brothers and sisters in Europe are basically saying Europe and the church's engagement in Europe is really a lab for the reality of what's going to happen in America. The fact is that there's going to be this fundamental shift. At some level, it's a secularizing, but it's a secularizing in a different way. In other words, New Copernicans are secular in their perspective, but they're not secular in the old way of thinking about secular. That is, they have a natural view of viewing reality, but they're open to the possibility of something more. So they're not like the new atheists. Most of our churches are spending an enormous amount of energy fighting the new atheists, people who have a closed view of reality. New Copernicans are secular in their perspective, but have an open view of reality. That is, they are interested in exploring a host of new ways of the possibility that there's something more, some greater context for meaning and significance. Now, this means that they're going to be embracing a wide variety of things that many within the church are going to find very bizarre, like neo-paganism and New Age, this, that, and the other. But the fact is this creates an enormous opportunity for us. So they're not secular in the old sense, but they are secular in this. They have a natural view of reality, but they're haunted by the possibility that there's something more. In other words, I write in the book about Julian Barnes, who made the statement in it's actually the first line in his book, I do not believe in God and I really miss him. And that catches this dual aspect of the sensibility that they are embodying. And so because it's a frame shift, a mental way of thinking, is not just about ages. In other words, it means that even somebody my age could be, in effect, a new Copernican, but even though I'm certainly not a millennial. It's just that millennials are the natives. Most millennials are the natives of this perspective. Many of the millennials we have in the evangelical church, though, are hybrids. That is, they have one foot in the traditional way of thinking and one foot in the new way of thinking, and they go back and forth, and they have a lot of discomfort and cognitive dissonance. Their friends are in one camp, their Christian friends are in another camp, and they're struggling with knowing how to navigate this. One of the things that is true within the church is that we have a whole group of parents our age who have children who have come out as gay or transgender or are living with their girlfriend or boyfriend or have rejected faith altogether. And they have an enormous amount of discomfort, in some cases shame, within their church community. There's no place that's safe for them to talk about this. We have tons of books about prospective parenting, but no books that say, how do you enter into your child's spiritual pilgrimage right where they are, even if they're very far away from faith and have rejected the faith of their fathers? There's almost nothing there. And within the LGBTQ community, the largest suicide rate is among people who are questioning. That is, people who are not out, but are questioning their sexual identity, mostly in the South, mostly with evangelical parents, have an 8 times higher suicide rate. Well, that should not be. But we have no safe place within the church to even have anything like this kind of conversation. So one of the hopes of my book is to equip parents to have a better understanding of their kids so that they can know how to enter in to their own spiritual pilgrimage right where they are and move them in a meaningful way toward Jesus.
Well, I think you equated it to C.S. Lewis being, in his spiritual pilgrimage, being a nominal Christian at the beginning of his spiritual journey. And now he's an icon of faith and does it in a way that is creative and reaches the imagination. Right. Of it's not the framework, it's the content of the Bible, but not in the framework of the Bible.
Right. Well, and most people don't recognize that journey. So actually took about 15 years. So he was a nominal Christian. When his mother died, he became an atheist in high school. He became a mystic, New Age, dabbled in the occult in graduate school, And then he interacted with Tolkien and Dyson, and they said, well, actually, there's a myth that's true, larger than the myth you have. Notice that it is not either or, it is both and. And he embraced the God of the Bible through an engagement with his imagination. But that journey took about 15 years. And most of us have a light switch mindset about conversion, and we don't have a pilgrimage mindset. And we need to enter into the fact that life is a journey, and we need to enter into the pilgrimage with others and walk with them, hear their stories, learn from them, share our own stories. And I think that is the exciting opportunity for the way we need to reframe evangelism to reach this coming generation.
Well, John, what you've just summarized was my 40th birthday and my beginning of my journey of coming out from under the rabbinical covering that I was under and asking the question, listen, I've listened for, at that point, at age 40, for 35 years, what the rabbis have to say about this and what the rabbis have to say about that. And I'd like to find out what God has to say. And they said, well, then you need to go find out. We're not the place for you to, that's what we do. We're the ones, we're the arbiters of this dialogue with God. You just follow our rules. And I said, okay, well, then we're going to part ways. And it took me 4 years to come to an understanding after looking at Eastern religions, after looking at New Age on this journey. And then even then it was like learning how to drive. Barely able to stay in your own half of the highway, heading in the same direction, but all over the place, okay, on this journey until finally, maybe 5 years into it, I could hold my own in my own lane without crashing. But at 10 years, I could navigate more automatically. And at 15 years, I was well into a solid, clear, defined path. And now it's 22 years later. And now and this is how the Jewish people are reached, is reframing the gospel message of you're going to die and go to hell. Listen, don't tell me that. Don't talk to me about it. That's not going to reach me. As a matter of fact, people don't realize that just even the wearing of a cross to a Jewish person, it's like the symbol of the electric chair. They say, why do you wear an electric chair? Well, what are you talking about? Well, that's what he was crucified on. Why would you? That's how you kill people, the electric chair. It's not, look at what's been done with the cross to the Jewish people. So you can't reach us in the same way you reach the Gentiles. We're reached much more relationally, much more. Listen, we have a solid community, and the community is intact. It's 14 million. And in Philadelphia, you have the Jewish Community Center, you have the Jewish Home for the Aged, you have so many, you have Jewish hospitals, there's a culture, there's a community, there's country clubs, and they agree on nothing, not politically, not socially, not economically, but one thing they do agree on is that Jesus was not the Messiah. And it's kept this group very tightly knit for 5,000 years. In order to break that paradigm, you have to have people come along to unhinge and bring a new way of thinking, a new way of framing the message. So when the gospel message was preached to me, not by a Christian, but by a Jew, who framed it in a vernacular that I understood, in terminology that I could relate to. And for me, it was the Lamb. It was all about the Lamb. It had everything to do with the Lamb. And so the only way we're going to reach is to speak a common language, but also a common aspiration. Right. Do you find that millennials are more mission-oriented? And I'll tell you why I say that. I have a dear friend, he's like a son to me, that started a new ministry in Israel. It's called the Beautiful Land Initiative. And all they do is they organize groups to clean up litter. This is all they do. This is their mission. Okay, is visitors coming, they walk along the beaches and they pick up litter. They go into the parking lots at shopping centers and they pick up litter. They are improving the environment by picking up litter. And they put out a video every week of, this week 120 tons of trash taken off of the beaches of the Sea of Galilee. This is their mission. And so after the group is done gathering all these trash bags, and they make this huge pile of all the trash bags, they all gather around, he plays some music, he sings, and they just share. They've just had this experience of cleaning up the beach together, and that brought them to a camaraderie of Jews and Gentiles and Arabs and Muslims and Christians, and whoever wants to come with them. They see what they're doing, they say, well, can we join in? And now they have tour groups coming who say that, we want to set aside this afternoon and go do a service project with the Beautiful Land Initiative. And it's evangelical, but it's not evangelical. It's evangelical through making the world a better place to live in.
Yes, and a shared experience that is relationally oriented and has aspiration. In other words, that illustration is quintessentially a new Copernican kind of endeavor. For example, in the fitness world, and I write about this in my book, boomers tended to run marathons and 10Ks and 5Ks, and they would be very competitive in their efforts, and it was all individual, and it was all about getting your best time. And none of that is the growing edge of the sport. Today it is mutter events or color events. It's shared events that are done as a team. It puts you outside your comfort zone, so you're having to be dependent on other people. And it's usually mud, beer, and obstacles. We call a mob. And so the fact is that it has this relational aspect baked into the physical activity. And it's not about winning. It's about having a shared experience collectively together and building teamwork. And so that mindset is what is driving this younger generation in ways. Now, I mentioned the word that they're haunted. That is, they're open to the possibility of some sense of transcendent. Mm-hmm. They tend to seek for God in four ways, generally. There's one other, but in most cases, they're too young for the fifth. So I'll mention four, and I'll tell you what the fifth is. So they tend to look for God in social justice. Your daughter's on-ramp will be in the area of ecology and deep ecology, and there's a whole spiritual side to the deep ecology movement that is an on-ramp to transcendent for people who care deeply about making the world green and dealing with the earth, to use the Jewish term tikkun olam.
Yes.
Others are oriented in the area of beauty and art and creativity, and they have their own aspirations, some in music, some in film, some in dance. The churches tended to be very poorly oriented to the way we have treated artists. Third are people who are trying to find it through love and relationships. There is something intrinsically transcendent about the recognition that love is at the root of all reality, that love in the Godhead is essential, and that it calls us to something larger than ourselves. And the fourth is spirituality, where they're looking for meaning through a host of generally not Christian, often Eastern, often borderline occult, but they're right where C.S. Lewis used to be. He was a real addict to Norse myths from Norway, Norse myths. Well, the leading authority on Norse myths is Neil Gaiman. And Neil Gaiman's book, American Gods, was at the center of Comic-Con 2 years ago. Then it was turned into a documentary film. Well, Lewis would find that a totally exciting opportunity for the church, whereas most of the church sees this as, oh my word, this is enormously scary and something we need to avoid. No, I think it's something we enter into and find ways to bring on-ramps to a deeper relationship with Jesus. The fifth way, which is not dominant with millennials, and that's suffering. And that's because they're too young mostly to have suffered a great deal, but in the larger scheme of things, suffering is one of them. There was an Orthodox priest who said that you need to become a poet before you become a Christian. And by that he meant you need to engage your right brain, your holistic, your imagination to reframe reality in that way. The next line in the book was, and you become a poet through suffering. The name of the book is Wounded by Love. The fact is that there are these opportunities for us to engage in the lives of our kids and to move them to a larger understanding of truth, reality, relationships, and to move them closer to an engagement with Jesus. John, so I have never been more excited about the opportunity facing the church. I'm pessimistic about institutional evangelicalism, but I'm enormously amped up about the fact that this is a prophetic correction to the church to actually make us more Jewish and actually more connected to the ancient church that preceded the Enlightenment, the 16th century.
Everything you've said takes me to Acts chapter 2. I know that that is the mission statement for so many churches. They want to be the Acts chapter 2 church. But here's what it says. It says, and they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, in the breaking of bread and in prayers. Then fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. Now all who believed were together and had all things in common, and sold their possessions and goods, and divided them among all as anyone had need. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with all people. And the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. It was through relationship, through breaking bread, through gathering, through fellowship, and that brought about the dialogue. It wasn't the dialogue that brought about the fellowship, it was the fellowship that brought about the dialogue. And this was the model given in the Bible. Now, I see churches all over called A2 Church, Acts 2 Church, this name, but they don't do any of this. There is no one heart, one voice, one spirit. There is no unity. And God says, behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell together in unity. They want to be a part of something, but they want to be a part of something that's more meaningful than what they perceive the church as doing today, because they're seeing people in the context of, I know what my mother and father are really like. I know how they really talk to each other. I know how they really engage with other people. I know what they do, and they act this way in church on Sunday, but they're not exactly that way all the time. And that's hypocritical, and this is more, I believe, altruistic, more philosophical, more in keeping with continuity and being real, as opposed to being...
Their term would be authentic.
Authentic. There you go. So nothing artificial. They want organic. They want nothing artificial. They want organic relationships, they want organic encounters, and they want an organic gospel, and they're hungry for truth. But
Yeah.
the framework of this truth, for one, it'll be a Rembrandt, for another, a Picasso, for another, a Monet, the freedom of expression. For others, it can be Sanskrit, and it's got to be all of that, or it has to be none of that, because...
Well, in Australia, on the ranches in Australia, there are two ways that they can keep cattle in the ranch. One is to build fences. And once the ranch becomes too big, the fences become a real problem. And if you go down the route of fences, then you spend a lot of time amending fences, repairing fences, and building more fences. Well, other people said, well, actually, that's not the most effective way to do it, because that is basically a coercive exclusion. And our kids know this. And most of our churches are in the business of building fences. That was not Jesus's way. Jesus's way was, the other approach in Australia is to build a well in the middle of the ranch. And it was the only water around, and so everybody was attracted. It was a magnetic attraction to the experience and reality of what was happening that was actually life-affirming and life-giving. So I'm arguing that what we need is churches that actually put the gospel at the center, but it's not a gospel of exclusion, but a gospel of the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Namely, there are resources available to you from divine sources that allow you to actually flourish as a human being, because you are designed to be in that kind of cosmic relationship.
Well, John, you make an incredible case. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. It's been a distinct pleasure to visit with you and to learn about the New Copernicans. John Seel, author of the New Copernicans, Understanding the Millennial Contribution to the Church. This is the unreached, and we need to reach them. And I thank you so much for this incredible work. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.